Okay, so in the last lecture, challenged Paul's premise 3, right? Taking this in sort of slightly reversed order. In this lecture, I want to talk a bit about premise 2 and some challenges to it, right? So premise 2 says to know the value of the options, you must know what the experiences that result are like. So I'm actually going to challenge this one in this lecture and the next lecture. I want to say most of the challenge in this lecture, but a few things that kind of push back on this in the next. So a possible solution to the problem here, and a way of maybe just denying this, is to say, well, look, just look at the objective data. Look at the objective data that doesn't involve experience. You don't need to know what it's like to have the experience. Just look at whether people report liking it or not, right? If you want to know whether you're likely to like something, well, if you see a survey that says 99 out of 100 people think it's just wonderful, pretty good chance you're going to like it too, right? That's a darn fine inductive argument. So look at all kinds of other stuff, right? You can look at reported well-being, how well do people think they're doing, happiness, other indicators, right? Take parenthood, right? Let's look at surveys of people who have kids, people who don't, who's happier, right? Who reports more well-being? We could maybe even make this finer grained. Maybe let's look at people like us, not just people in general. Now, this can tell us a lot, can it? Statistics, what people on average say about something, right? Look, there's all these measures of personal well-being, happiness, things like that are higher in people who go to college than people who don't. It's maybe a very good reason to go to college, right? There's all kinds of indicators that people who live in certain types of cities are way happier. I can't remember all of them, but I know being near the water is a big one. People really like that. So we're doing well here, right? Weather's another one. Really cold weather people hate. So look, not to make fun of our friends in Minnesota. I've known people from Minnesota I quite like. In fact, everybody from Minnesota I've quite liked. But, just looking at this, well, statistics tell us people who don't live near the water, who put up with long winters, tend to be less happy than people who live near the water and have a lot nicer winter. Probably have some reasons to think that if you move from Virginia Beach or Norfolk to, say, I don't know, somewhere in the middle of Minnesota, because Minnesota has lakes. Let's make it even, Kansas, right? You have brutal winters there, no water, right? Probably going to be happier living here than you would in Kansas City, Kansas, right? And there are some cases where unambiguously, no question, what you need to value the options to figure out which one is better is just hard data. You don't need to know a thing about the experience. Let me give you an example. And this is from a philosopher, William Talbot, in a review of Paul's book. Talbot says, well, look, imagine you have cancer. I mean, I know, grim thing to imagine. And imagine the doctor tells you, well, it's a bad case, but, there's 2 possible treatments. We can't try both. We can only try one because, by the time we try the first one, we try one, see if it works, we won't have time to try the second one, right? And the doctor says, well, look, there's one that works about 30% of the time. There's this new one, though, and it's actually way better. It works in cases like yours 70% of the time. Now, what would you say to the doctor? Would you say, well, doc, tell me more. what is it like to undergo these treatments? What is it like? What's the experience of the treatment? I need to know that first. Or would you just say, well, why are you even telling me this? Give me the one that's more likely to cure the cancer, right? Give me the 70%. Well, if you'd say that pretty clearly, you can value some options without having any idea what they're like, right? You don't know what either treatment is like, and you wouldn't even care. You would just care which one is more effective. So I think you should say I think we have to say to Paul, look, there are some cases where you don't need to know anything about the relevant experience, or at least not much, to know what's better and what's worse, right? Look, if the 70% treatment had pains that were like the tortures of hell, then maybe we wouldn't want it, right? But as long as we knew that it wasn't that much more painful than the other one, we wouldn't need to know much about what it's like to know which option we should take, right? So, at least in some cases, pretty clearly, you don't need to know what it's like to value the options. Now, I think what Paul could say here is like, well, yeah, some cases are like that, but other cases, like parenthood, are different. Well, I don't know. Can't objective data really tell us nothing about other cases? I don't know. Here's what Paul will say. And I think these two responses, one amounts to saying, well, even if it could tell us a lot, it would be wrong to use it. In principle, using objective data to make some big decisions, like, say, being a parent, is wrong or off in some way. Even if you could do it, you shouldn't. I think 2 is way better. And 2 just says, well, even if in most cases, the objective data just isn't good enough to really do the work you want it to do. So response 1, Paul doesn't really say much about it in the piece I had you guys read. In her book, she says a lot more about this. And she says, using objective data, using statistics, using things that don't make reference to personal experience is in some way inauthentic, she says. That's what's wrong with it. I don't know what to make of this because I don't even know what authenticity is supposed to be, much less how this is inauthentic or why it's bad. I think her much better response is 2. Even in a lot of cases, there's not objective data about what option we should choose. My cancer treatment example was really artificial. It's very rare for any important choice that you get information that's that clear, right? When there is objective data, it's often very hard to interpret, and it's often contradictory, right? Think about parenthood. Studies about parenthood are all over the map. I'd say some of this, one of the things you've got to be really careful with for taking polls or surveys or whatever is what you ask people, right? Asking someone if they're happy is not the same as asking them how satisfied they are with their life, and asking them how satisfied they are with their life is not the same as asking them how meaningful they find their life, right? So I'm going to guess you ask these different questions, you get back different figures. But anyway, it's just hard to tell whether people who have children have better lives than people who don't, given what they say. In some surveys, they find that people without children are happier. that tended to be the consensus. Some other ones now are tending to find that people who have children are happier or at least more satisfied with their lives. An interesting one I saw said that in Europe, people who have children either tend to be happier or the same level of happiness as people who don't. In America, people who have children tend to be less happy. One of the reasons the thoughts here was that daycare in America is so ridiculously expensive. It's just harder to have children here. Anyway, suffice it to say, the data is really hard to interpret. It's all over the map. So I think Paul's best response here is just to say, well, for a lot of big decisions, we just don't have good enough objective information. Surveys are contradictory. Even if they're not, they're hard to interpret. How much help are they really? But one thing you might say here is, well, if the objective information we currently have isn't great, maybe we can just try to get better information, right? Finer grained information, what people like us would like. I don't know. Might seem like a far out possibility, but, think about, the algorithms on Amazon and things like that. I mean, these are not perfect. I mean, if I've had it recommend to me books by authors I completely loathe. And, you have Facebook's little ads. I've had more than once, like, trying to get me to give to a political figure that I kind of wish would just, well, jump off a pier or something. But, so they don't always work perfectly, but they're getting better. So you might say, well, why not just try to get these things better and better if you really think there's a problem, Paul? I don't know. Who knows how good they could ever get? But if the problem just is they don't have enough detail and they're contradictory, that's a hard problem, but it seems like maybe a solvable one, right?